Hello and welcome to this edition of Curator with a Camera. I'm Thomas Spain and today we'll be looking at Winston Churchill. This is Winston Churchill. It was built in 1946 and it was withdrawn in 1965. It is an example of a Light Pacific locomotive. Essentially, its preservation is down to one day in its life. Because of its name, it was the locomotive chosen to haul Winston Churchill's funeral train from London Waterloo to Handborough, north of Oxford, in January 1965. To get the full story of Winston Churchill and the Light Pacifics, you have to go back to 1937 when the designer, Oliver Bulleid, arrived on the Southern Railways, employed as the Southern Railways chief mechanical engineer. He'd never designed a locomotive of his own before, and he inherited a fairly old locomotive stock. So Bulleid was given the task of designing a new locomotive capable of running from Waterloo to Exeter. The resulting locomotive was the Merchant Navy class of 1941. The Merchant Navy class was rather heavy, and so the decision was made to actually build a similar, slightly smaller version of the Merchant Navy. So the result was the Light Pacific. And this is one of the most well-known of the Light Pacifics. Winston Churchill is probably one of the most advanced steam locomotive designs in the National Collection. So what makes it tick is as much what you can't see as what you can see. So the Light Pacifics have a really unique profile like the Merchant Navy class, and essentially it has what is known as airsmooth casing. It is not streamlined casing. The designer was a bit of a skeptic when it came to streamlining. But essentially, it covers the boiler and also hides a multitude of piping runs underneath. And also, it was easier to manufacture. So essentially, this just sits on top of the frames, and you can see there's a support bracket there. Now, one of the main sort of unique features of the aesthetic of this locomotive is actually the driving wheels, which are very, very similar to the American box-pock style of wheel. But these are actually patented. They were developed by the designer Oliver Bulleid with Firth Brown of Sheffield, and they're known as Bulleid Firth Brown wheels. The reason why they were adopted is essentially they're a lot stronger than the spoked variety. They're also 10% lighter than the spoked variety, and they also gave an all-round support to the tyre. And yes, railway vehicles do have tyres. If you notice, there's some pockets in the wheels there, and the lubrication inside the axle boxes, which are behind this part of this central boss in the middle. The lubrication was constant, and it sort of seeped into the pockets. And when the locomotive started to move off and gathered speed, it got flung up into the casing, along with all the crud and muck and things that accumulate underneath, and it could kind of spontaneously combust whenever there's a spark. And so there are some sort of cases whereby the locomotive had to be put out by the local fire brigade, having stopped with the express. These little slots here, these are the sand for the sandboxes, and this is one of the problems of the casing, the airsmooth casing. There's actually no running plate on the casing, so essentially the only way you could fill these sandboxes is by leaning a ladder against it, which isn't sort of the safest thing in the world. One of the unique features of this particular design of locomotive is its chain-driven valve gear, which is essentially, it's almost like two industrial-sized bicycle chains connecting the driving axle to the valves at the front. And that's one of the reasons why the locomotive is rather clean in terms of the connecting and coupling rods on the exterior, on account of the fact that a lot of the valve gear, which would normally be located around here, is actually inside the frames. Bulleid felt that the time for oiling round locomotives in the manner of finding one of anything up to 90 or 100 individual oiling points was over. And he decided to adopt motor car practice by putting all the valve gear inside an oil sump or an oil bath, where they could be continuously lubricated and, in theory, free from contamination. What works in theory doesn't always work in practice, because the oil bath, water sometimes seeped into it, contaminating the oil. And the other problem was it was very difficult to actually access and inspect the mechanics of the locomotive when you look inside it. The problem is with this sort of casing, as you're travelling down the line at speed, the smoke has a habit of drifting downwards and obscuring the view from the cab. A lot of experimentation was done to actually try and prevent this sort of drifting smoke. And the result was kind of what you see here. So you can kind of see, you can see sort of the smoke deflectors there on the sides, either side there. And there's also this cowl arrangement. And again, this is why it's airsmooth rather than streamlined, because it's actually quite a bulky front. Some of the unique parts of the locomotive include the electric lighting, and I'll show you the site of the generator in a moment. But this is actually a coupling light here, which lights up the coupling sort of down below there, which is obviously very useful at night. The electric lights, these are route indicator lights. So the southern railway and the southern region didn't actually classify their expresses and goods trains. They actually classified their trains by the route that they were taking. So this is why on southern locomotives you do tend to see route discs, which essentially provide the daytime equivalent of these electric lamps when they're lit. So I was on about the generator. This is the electric generator, which has a steam-powered turbine in it. And essentially it provides all the electric lighting on the locomotive. The Light Pacifics, 110 of them were built. The first 48 of them were known as the West Country class. They were named after resorts and holiday destinations and districts of the West Country. But the Battle of Britain had recently been fought in 1940. And the decision was made to actually commemorate the Battle of Britain and all the airfields and squadrons that fought in 11 Group and some of the personalities associated with the Battle of Britain. And as a result, Winston Churchill being Prime Minister at the time of the Battle of Britain, that meant that he got a locomotive named after him. The nameplate is essentially, it's supposed to be stylistically something along the lines of an aerofoil shape. It's kind of like, it's supposed to look a bit like the wings of an aircraft. And it's painted in Air Force blue. And then pretty much all of the Battle of Britain class, apart from one, actually got given one of these crests. And so these crests either had the coat of arms of the person that the locomotive is commemorating, the organisation, the airfield, or the squadron. Okay, so that's the outside of Winston Churchill. Now we're going to have a look in the cab and see how it differs from other steam locomotives. And here we are inside the cab. So imagine you were driving a plodding King Arthur class locomotive with an open back cab in bleak midwinter, and then getting on the footplate of one of these for the first time. It's kind of almost space age technology compared to what had gone on before. This cab is unlike other British steam locomotives insofar that all the controls are grouped so that all the driver's controls are on the driver's side and all the fireman's controls are on the fireman's side. So that meant that you could actually operate everything you wanted to do without crossing the cab when you're on the move. Here we are at the driver's controls of Winston Churchill, and this handle that you can see here is the regulator. That's essentially like your throttle in a car. It admits the steam to the cylinders. The next most important item is this device here. This is a steam reverser. Now a reverser controls the cut-off of the valve in the cylinders, and it also changes the direction of the locomotive. The difference between this particular locomotive's reverser and others is the fact that it is steam powered, whereas most other locomotives had manual reversers. The next most important, well, if not the most important control on the driver's side is the brake system. So you've got the vacuum brake here, and then you've got the steam brake for the locomotive here. You've also got the AWS, the Advanced Warning System gauge here, which is giving a warning to the driver here. You've also got the speedometer, which is quite a late addition. As you can see, it's got BR written on it. You've also got the brake pressure gauge there, which gives you a sense of what the condition of the brake is. Below that, you've got the steam chest pressure gauge, which kind of makes sure that you're not dumping the entire pressure of the boiler into the steam chest in one go. Suffice to say, you'll get a rather nasty slip. The usual thing was, what you'd do is you'd sort of pump the regulator a bit, and the pressure would sort of build up a little bit until you kind of started to move off, and then you started adjusting the cut-off of the valves and then opening the regulator further. Moving on to the fireman side of the operation, you got the two gauge glasses here, and these essentially work by refraction to give you a sense of what the water level is in the boiler. So in terms of the refraction, you can see this is empty on account of the fact that the diagonal lines are all perfect. If there's water in the boiler, the middle would actually go in the opposite direction, which is the effect of the refraction. One of the more interesting features of the Bulleid footplate is actually the steam-operated Firehole door. It's a very novel feature, very unusual for a British locomotive anyway. And essentially what you're looking at here is a piston, and the piston is connected to a treadle which operates a steam valve, which admits steam into the piston to automatically open the firehole doors. So the fireman could actually just not actually touch the firehole doors beyond touching the treadle, as it were, and he could actually get up a rhythm in sort of getting a shovel full of coal, opening the firehole door with his foot, and then getting the coal into the firebox. Just in case there's a problem with the steam-operated firehole door, you've still got the manual mechanism, and you can see the handle here, just in case there's an issue. So this is probably one of the more fun controls in the cab. It's the whistle. Bulleid whistles were rather unusual for a British locomotive, insofar that they were allegedly middle C in note, and when you compare it to a Stania hooter or a Gresley chime whistle, it is very distinctive. Where the Bulleid Pacifics and Winston Churchill kind of fits in the overall story of steam in Britain is the fact that there's so many innovations crammed into one locomotive design. And I think in a sense they kind of pointed in the direction that steam still had a bit of life left in it in terms of development. But just because it's an advanced locomotive, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the most reliable. Things went wrong with these, but speaking personally, I wouldn't change them for the world. thank you for watching Curator with a camera. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please leave a like and do subscribe for more videos.